日本語一の皆さんこんばんは。そして村中学校の皆さんこんばんは。キッチン先生です。皆さんお元気ですか？先生は元気です。はい、じゃあ始めましょう。気をつけ。はい、お願いします。So today I'm here to talk to you guys about verbs. So we've been doing a lot with lots of different verbs over the year, and so I just wanted to kind of pick up from there and go. So I brought 3 verbs for us today just to kind of get us started. If you can read with me. Kakimasu, yes. Tabemasu, and shimasu. Kakimasu means to write, yes. Tabemasu, to eat, and shimasu, to do, right? So I wrote these 3 because they represent 3 categories of verbs. And so far we've just talked about verbs. But similar to there's non-adjectives and e-adjectives, there are 3 different types of verbs. And so our goals today are to kind of break down what those 3 categories of verbs are. So that's our number 1 goal. Number 2, I want to introduce to you a different form. We sometimes call it the short form, the dictionary form, the informal form, plain form. But basically, all of these mas forms that we've used, mas and masen, mashita, masen deshita, all of that is good, great Japanese. It's formal, it's polite. Probably with your friends, you wouldn't use this as much. And so we want to be able to talk more informally, which is a goal that we have, right? If you're going to actually be using it, you're going to want to, and when you watch things, you're going to hear more informal things. And so we want to be able to understand that. So that's one part of it. The other part is sometimes if you use verbs in the middle of the sentence later on in more complicated Japanese, they go into this shorter form. So 2 goals. Understand the different categories and understand how to go into this new form, okay? Here's our 3 types. We call these U verbs. In different places they'll call them class 1 verbs, but I'll just call them U verbs. These are Ru verbs or class 2, and irregular or class 3 verbs, okay? So these are the 3 different types. We're going to go from the bottom to the top. Mostly because it's most straightforward that way. So we're going to start out with the group 3 or the irregular verbs, okay? So, you with me? All right. So, how do we recognize irregular verbs? Well, there's 2 of them, shimasu and kimasu, okay? When I say shimasu, I'm also including like 勉強します or 買い物します or 料理します right? There's a lot of different shimases, but this, right, when this shimasu comes up, it is irregular. Kimasu, to come, yes, that is our other irregular verb, okay? So in terms of recognizing them, just memorize these 2 verbs. These are your irregulars. So how do we switch it into this short form, this plain form? So you just have to kind of memorize it. But basically, shimasu becomes suru, and kimasu becomes kuru. Okay, and so instead of saying 今日私は勉強します, you could say 今日勉強する. Right? It's shorter. Number 1 rule in Japanese is if it's shorter, it's less formal. It's also easier to say, all right? What about kimasu? Like, I'll come tomorrow. 明日来る, right? 明日私は来ます, right? 明日来る. Or a lot of times we'll say, like, when you're leaving somebody's house, you'd say, like, また来ます. You could say また来る, right? So that's sort of a thing, right? So we have shimasu becomes suru and kimasu becomes kuru. So that, my friends, is our irregular. Check. All right, shimasu. The other one is kimasu. Exactly. Shimasu becomes suru, kimasu becomes kuru. All right, moving on to our next group, which we're calling the reverbs. Okay, the reverbs are pretty straightforward. Okay, a couple things that I want to note on these. All right, when we are trying to create, this goes for verbs and reverbs. And so if you look at a verb and it's not shimasu and kimasu, and you want to change it into this form, the first thing you want to do is you want to get rid of the mas and make it what I call the stem form. And so, erasing. High technology here. All right, so instead of tabemasu, now we have tabe. Nemasu becomes ne. Mimasu becomes mi. And okimasu becomes oki. I have a little star here because it's kind of an exception, a little bit in terms of recognizing. So when we're looking for a reverb, we're going to look for a verb stem that does not end in the E sound. So tabe, there's no E. Ne, no E. Now mi is an E, but it's a solo character here, and so it would also qualify to be a reverb. Okay? Now this one is an exception that you just need to know. The good news for you guys, the list of verbs that I give you, or Saiki Sensei is going to give you, it'll already tell you that it's a reverb, so don't stress. But the way that we change it into this short form, it's a reverb, so you just add ru. So, tabe ru, ne ru, mi ru, oki ru. And so, instead of saying, terebi o mimasu ka? Like, do you want to watch TV? You could say, terebi miru? Asking questions, right? I love to eat ramen, and so I would say, ramen o taberu. Ima neru, right? So these sorts of things we can say, all right? Get rid of mas, add ru. That is how our ru verbs work. Okay. So we have knocked off shimasu and kimasu become suru and kuru. The reverbs, tabemasu, we get rid of mas and add ru. So we just have one left to go. Unfortunately, it's the most challenging one. So our verbs, okay? And so I brought a handful of them here for us to play around with. Kakimasu, hanashimasu, and kaerimasu, okay? And the first thing, like with the last one, we're going to get rid of mas. All right? So we end up with kaki, hanashi, and kaeri. All right? So you will notice that every single one of them ends in an E sound, which is one of our clues that it's an U verb, right? When you get rid of the verb stem, is always going to end in E. Okay? So when I say it always ends in E, this may be a little hard to see here, but you can see from over here, you have E, ki, shi, chi, he, right? These are all E sounds, okay? And in order to make it the short form, we're going to take these E sounds and we're going to move them into the U row, okay? And so ki is going to become ku, shi is going to become su. If we have a chi, it's going to become tsu, and so forth. And so, so what we have here, right? We have kaki, hanashi, kaeri. So what's kaki going to become? It's going to become kaku. What about hanashi? It's going to become hanasu. What about kaeri? It's going to become kaeru. Okay? So just understanding that changing from one row to the next row. Ki becoming ku, shi becoming su, ri becoming ru. And so if you get confused, be sure to look at your hiragana chart and kind of refer to that. That'll help you out. But just so that you guys have a little bit of practice, I brought nomimasu and kikimasu, which are also U verbs. All right? So if you follow the steps that I gave you, the first thing you're going to do Yeah. Get the stem form. Okay. Now what is nomi going to become? Yep. That will become no mu. What about kiki? Become kiku. All right. So you can say ocha o nomu or ongaku o kiku. Okay. So I'm going to go back to my first one and just double check and see where we are. All right. So we've talked about that there's 3 different types of verbs. There's verbs, there's reverbs, and there's irregular verbs. For these ones, the verbs, the last ones that we talked about, we're going to get rid of the mas, and we're going to take this e sound and put it into the column. So this would become kaku. The reverbs, pretty straightforward. All right, we get rid of mas and we're going to add our ru, taberu. Our regular verbs, we have shimas. What's the other one? Kimas. And so they would become suru and kuru. Okay? And the reason why we use it is for informal speech. We put it in the middle of the sentence sometimes. You have a worksheet to work with that. Practice just changing it. And then as we go along, we're going to practice trying to use it in more informal speech, talking to each other, okay? So try to look at that and be prepared to practice with me later, okay? All right, 終わりましょう。気をつけ。はい。ありがとうございました。おやすみなさい。